Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Porter Says podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Heath, of course. You guys should know that by now. And in this episode today, I'm going to be doing my very first Q&A. Kind of exciting for me. I will say it's like a lot of the questions I got are from people that I do know personally in my life. But it's still really cool because I've always wanted to do a Q&A, but I was just like, I'm nowhere near that level of having enough fans and all that stuff. But I made an announcement video and it got not a whole lot of views, but it got a decent amount of views. So that's what we're doing today. I've got 12 questions to answer. But without further ado, let's get straight into the first question. So the first question I have here is, if you could have any power, whether you make it up or not, what would it be and why? Very good question. If I could have any power, personally, I mean, it's kind of a bit of a basic answer, but the power to control water. I think that's a really cool power, because think about all the stuff you can do. Like, you can do very creative stuff, like look at Poseidon, look at Percy Jackson, look at some of the characters in Avatar: The Last Airbender. There's water bending. The second question I have here is, apart from the main three characters in Harry Potter, who is your favorite character in the series? Hagrid, by far. I adore Hagrid. I loved Robbie Coltrane's portrayal. May he rest in peace. And I think Nick Frost has the potential to not top Robbie Coltrane, but I think he has the potential to like be a really good Hagrid. And I've seen a lot of the set photos, and it looks awesome. So, all right, biggest fright in a movie. Biggest fright in a movie. I would assume that's, I don't know. It doesn't really have to be horror, I guess. There is a scene in the horror film called Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, where this creepy ass corpse is walking around in the dark hallway of the one of the characters' house, screaming, or not screaming out, but kind of speaking out and saying, "Where's my toe?" And it's in this dark hallway, and he or she is walking through. The corpse is one of the creepiest designs I've ever seen. It just, every time I see that scene in particular in the movie, it scares me. And then when the character gets taken, he's under his bed, you hear the boom, pulls him under, and it's just a close-up of this creature's face, screams, and pulls him through into some other world. That's the only option I can think of right now. Another one actually would probably be in Jaws, because I recently just saw that. When one of the characters goes into the water and comes across like this abandoned, or not abandoned, but like this like ship or something, and this head just pops out. Gave me a really big fright in the theater. So that's my answer. What is one movie that you would ban from history, and why? That is a good question, because there's a lot. There's a lot of movies that I really dislike and that I wish they just weren't a thing anymore. I have a few. I'd say Cats from 2019. My least favorite movie of all time. I hate that movie with a burning passion. If I got the chance to erase it, like it never happened, I'd go with that one. And then, I mean, maybe some of those non-Spider-Man Sony movies like Morbius and Madam Web, Craven, Venom 2, just any of those really. Like, I think those are my two answers to that one. I hate those movies so much. And what is a film that changed your life in some way? Or affected your life, or whatever. I mean, it has to, for me personally, I know I talk about it a lot, but I don't care at this point. The Harry Potter series for me, that film series, it just, when I first watched The Philosopher's Stone on VHS, I was just, and this is like that I've been told when I was like a year old. My parents brought it home on VHS, put it on, and I was just mesmerized. And ever since then, it changed my life in such a good way because it made me realize that like, wow, like when I got older and would rewatch them, it just made me go, wow, like I wish this was my life, you know? It just made me, it was like one of the first, it was probably the first series that made me become a film person. So I'd say, you know, that just because like it was the one I grew up with. It was the first franchise I ever saw in my life, obviously. Even at 1 year old, it's quite crazy. So that's my answer to that one. Now, these questions here, it's from a friend of mine. So he asked a couple. Favorite line from each of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies? Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's the basic ones are like all the stuff, all the memeable lines, like I'm something of a scientist myself, and like I don't know, out am I, and you know how much I sacrificed. So I would probably go, you know, I'm something of a scientist myself from the first Raimi movie. The second film, and this is a serious quote, I really like the scene, it's towards the end of Spider-Man 2 when Peter Parker says to Doc Ock, you know, to do what's right, we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most, even our dreams. So it's that one from Spider-Man 2. And then Spider-Man 3, where do I even begin? I'm going to put some dirt in your eye and you know, you want forgiveness? Get religion. But, I mean, those are kind of like funny answers. A serious answer for me is at the very end when he says, it's the choices that make us who we are and we can always choose to do what's right. And that's what I really love about each of the Spider-Man movies, the Raimi movies, that each of them have a theme. And if you could recast any superhero, who would you cast in what role? I can't think. When I was going through these questions and I got to that one, I was like, oh God. It's tough because I think the majority of the superhero roles, the actors that have been casted are pretty spot on. But I mean, I would have liked to have seen what Tom Cruise could have done with Iron Man. So maybe Iron Man and could have Tom Cruise as him because I feel like Tom Cruise is a bit too old now, but maybe as like a variant or something. I don't know. I could have seen that happening. All right, now these next two is going to be interesting. A movie you couldn't finish. There's a bunch. Okay, maybe there's not a bunch. The only one that's coming to mind right now is the movie Candy Cane Lane with Eddie Murphy. It was like a Christmas movie released on Amazon Prime like 2 or 3 years ago, and I got an hour into it and said, I'm good. I was like, I wrote a Letterboxd review and said, Eddie Murphy, I love you, man. Okay, maybe not exactly that, but I'm like, I love you, Eddie Murphy, but from what I saw from this movie, it was bad. Yeah, Candy Cane Lane. A critically acclaimed movie you couldn't finish. The one that is coming to mind right now is Everywhere, Everything, All at Once or something. That's such a confusing title. I watched maybe like 30 minutes of it and it's just, I'm like, it's just not doing it for me. It's confusing. It's all over the place. And yeah, I mean, look, I get that a lot of people love it. It won like a couple of Oscars or was nominated for a bunch. But I just personally could not get into it. Like, I thought the acting was good and like, but that's it. I just wasn't invested in any of the characters. Yeah, so that's that one. A film that lived up to the hype. All right, well, I mean, honestly, the majority of Marvel movies are ones that are coming to my head right now, and I think Avengers Infinity War lived up to the hype. Endgame did. Spider-Man No Way Home. I mean, just to think outside of that, I remember back in like 2014 when Boyhood came out, a lot of people were raving about that movie, saying it was pretty fantastic, and I was like, all right, I got to watch this, and I didn't get to watch it until about a year later, and obviously for me, it lived up to the hype, and I've talked about Boyhood a lot, so it's those ones. What else? I mean, I don't know. And the last question is the best movie villain. That is a tough one. There are so many iconic villains in film history, and even like TV shows, but this is just movies specifically. I mean, like, Darth Vader's up there. I love Darth Vader, and, you know, honestly, I would probably go... It might not be the best, but I'm going to go with Thanos. I just remember the MCU built him up for like 10 plus years as this guy who was just going to take over the world and be like the most evil villain ever, and the way they wrote him in specifically for Infinity War was excellent. Josh Brolin killed it, because if you really think about it, and this is a thing that people have said for years, is that it really is his movie. Like, he is our main character of the movie. Like, the Avengers are kind of the bad guys in that movie, from, if you look at it from his perspective, what he is doing. You know, he wants to wipe out 50% of the Earth. What he is doing, he thinks it's right. He doesn't see it as bad. You know, he sees it as, you know, equally balanced, as all things should be. So, I think that is such a good motivation for a villain. And he's by far, still to this day, probably the best villain in the MCU that we will ever get. So there we go. There was my very first Q&A podcast episode done. I really hope you enjoyed this one. I had a ton of fun with these questions. Thank you to everybody who sent them in, which is weird because, again, I know the majority of people. Yeah. I hope you guys have a good rest of your week, and I will catch you guys next time. Take care.